Apocalypsis Historia presents Shakespeare or Not Shakespeare? Making sense of Shakespeare's The Passionate Pilgrim. A follow-up to WTF is William Shakespeare. In 1599, The Passionate Pilgrim, a poetry collection, was printed. It contained 14 lyrical poems with an appendix of 6 additional poems, which were introduced by the separate title of Sonnets to Sundry Notes of Music. The 20 poems are of varied poetic merit. The title page unmistakably bears William Shakespeare's name, by W. Shakespeare. The collection was printed by William Jaggard and Thomas Pavier. This is the same duo that will famously give us, 20 years later, the so-called False Folio, a collection of 10 plays and quarto attributed to Shakespeare. Despite the False Folio and The Passionate Pilgrim, Jaggard and Pavier seem to have been legitimate printers with legitimate connections to canonical Shakespeare, with no reason for surreptitious printing. So Shakespeare wrote all 20 of these poems, right?
Wrong. At least according to scholars. According to them and all their wisdom, Shakespeare only wrote 5 of the 20 poems. For anyone new to this phenomenon, scholars like to change the rules with Shakespeare. Apparently, just because something says Shakespeare doesn't mean it is Shakespeare. Similarly, a work with another name on it or no name on it at all can still be called Shakespeare. And to be fair, they're probably absolutely right to do this. The Elizabethan print industry was something of a Wild West. We probably shouldn't automatically trust the title page. What seems amiss is an exact understanding of when, where, how, and why we should trust some external evidence over other evidence. No current scholars seem to think that other hands are present in the sonnets or Venus and Adonis, so why is this different? Well, Passionate Pilgrim isn't special. There's another poem, a funeral elegy, printed in 1612 as by W.S. Scholars generally agree that this poem is not by Shakespeare, but likely by John Ford. Notice the lack of W's and S's in Ford's name. So maybe you've noticed by now, scholars and non-scholars alike have no issues with questioning the deep cut. But the big name items like the popular plays and sonnets are sacred. Okay, but back to The Passionate Pilgrim. Why only 5 of 20?
The answer is a little disappointing. The 5 poems identified as Shakespeare are ID'd as such because we find them printed elsewhere as by Shakespeare. Passionate Pilgrim number 1 is reprinted 10 years later as Sonnet 138. Passionate Pilgrim number 2 is reprinted 10 years later as Sonnet 144. Passionate Pilgrim number 3 is taken from Longaville's sonnet in Love's Labour's Lost. Passionate Pilgrim number 5 is taken from Baronne's sonnet in Love's Labour's Lost. And Passionate Pilgrim number 16 is taken from Dumain's poem in Love's Labour's Lost. So one wonders, had Love's Labour's Lost and Sonnets 138 and 144 never been printed, would scholars say none of the poems in Passionate Pilgrim are by Shakespeare?
Oddly though, these 5 are not the only 5 printed elsewhere. Number 8 was printed a year earlier, and scholars give it to Barnfield. Number 11 was printed 3 years earlier as part of Bartholomew Griffin's sonnet sequence. Number 12 was printed 6 years earlier as part of a collection called Garland of Goodwill. Number 17 was printed 2 years earlier as part of Thomas Wilkes' Madrigals. Number 19, reprinted a year later as by Marlowe, and then The Last Stanza was expanded into its own poem and printed as by Raleigh. Poem number 20 was printed a year earlier anonymously. Scholars now give it to Barnfield.
Clearly, something weird is happening. Enter the Shakespeare authorship question, specifically group theory. A lot of folks want to say De Vere is 100% Shakespeare. The jury is still out on that, but we think that Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, 100% wrote Passionate Pilgrim number 7. On the left is Passionate Pilgrim number 7, and on the right are excerpts from Edward de Vere's poetry. Notice the amount of vocabulary overlap between all the bolded black words. Pause if you need time. Pause again. Compare Edward de Vere's poem number 19 to Passionate Pilgrim number 7. Do they look the same to you?
Edward de Vere only has 20 poems still in print himself. The fact that there is so much overlap with such a small sample size strongly suggests de Vere's hand. It's not just the same words, it's the same structure, it's the same theme too. Well, maybe those crazy Oxfordians are right. Maybe de Vere wrote all of Shakespeare. Okay, chill. Let's nip that in the bud here too. Almost nobody wants to say that Philip Sidney has any part in the works of Shakespeare. I think the jury should still be out on that too, but we do think that Philip Sidney 100% wrote Passionate Pilgrim number 17. This is Passionate Pilgrim number 17. Notice the bolded red words. They overlap with Sidney's works that we will see on the next slide. Pause if you need to read. Notice the bolded red words. They match up perfectly. Phrases like God wot, all love is dead, and Corydon. Those are unique phrases specific to Sidney. Pause if you need. On the left, we have Passionate Pilgrim number 17. On the right, we have Philip Sidney's Astrophel and Estella 9th Song. Notice the overlap. My flocks feed not. Go, my flock, get you hence. Do these look the same to you too? Pause if you need. And as with de Vere and Passionate Pilgrim number 7, it's not just an overlap of vocabulary, but syntax, theme, mood, and structure. We even have matching companion poems by both de Vere and Sidney with the Passionate Pilgrim poems. So what's the takeaway?
Takeaway number 1. Let's quit assuming the authorial moniker known as William Shakespeare stands for just one person. Maybe we should assume the opposite. Takeaway number 2. Let's acknowledge that there are at very least folks like de Vere and Sidney are being conflated with Shakespeare in the peak era of Shakespeare.
And takeaway number 3, let's realize that scholars have dropped the ball on deep-cut Shakespeare and non-Shakespeare material alike. Look, this wasn't difficult. Like, comment, subscribe, maybe join our Patreon. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Tune in for more.
And as always, Nullius in Verba.